Today we'll be visiting with a New York Times best-selling author with more than 15 million books in print. He's received 4 Gold Medallion Book of the Year awards for quality and impact. His best-selling series won 2 of these awards and have sold over 4 million copies. We'll be visiting with him again on today's The Inside Story.
Welcome to another episode of The Inside Story, exclusively on Liftable.tv. They say everyone has a book in them, but turning that desire into a compelling story can seem overwhelming. That's where The Inside Story comes in. Your host, Walt Larimore, is himself an author of over 40 books. Walt's goal in every episode is to inspire and entertain you by spending quality time with best-selling authors and having conversations about the art and the heart of writing. In this episode, you'll be encouraged and equipped to lean into your own writing dream and pick up some insider tips and tricks of the trade. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready for The Inside Story on Liftable.tv.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Walt Larimore and I'm so glad you're joining me in my home library for The Inside Story. On this show, I have the privilege of chatting with some of the best-known Christian authors for 2 shows. The first show is about their heart as a writer, and the second is about the art and craft of their writing. And today is the second part of my interview with today's guest. His first book, Hooked on Life, was published in 1984, and he's published 125 books since. His most recent Gold Medallion Book of the Year win was in 2020 in the Youth Nonfiction category with his book Kirby McCook and the Jesus Chronicles. His most popular books include Toxic Faith, The Life Recovery Bible, the world-famous Every Man's Battle, Healing is a Choice, and Take Your Life Back. His most recent book, released in June 2021, was The Soul of a Hero. The Inside Story is delighted to welcome back for part 2 of our interview, Steve Arterburn. Steve, welcome back.
Thank you, Walt. And it's great to be back for the second part. Maybe this part you could ask easier questions. And
I think you'll enjoy this. They're easier questions, and they're the questions that young writers, aspiring writers, people that think they want to do a book at some point will really resonate with what you've learned. So let's start with reading. Most writers are readers. What do you like to read?
Well, I have attention deficit disorder. So, and it's a terminal case, sadly, and always under medicated. So I like shorter things than longer things. For instance, probably my favorite book right now that I read regularly still is, it comes out of Tyndale, and it's part of the 1 year, it's called the 1 Year Amazing, 365 Amazing Stories. And it's by an author named Peterson. And every day, there's a full page or sometimes 2 pages, a story, the backstory behind some well-known person and what all went on in their life. And it's just fascinating. So I love reading things like that. I love getting the, even in nonfiction, learning about the story of Rembrandt and why he painted not just one prodigal son, but 2. When it comes to fun reading, my favorite novelist, and you can judge me for this however you want, is John Grisham. I just really love his style. I think he's a really good man, and I like to read his stuff. And as far as theologians and just great, easy reading that's insightful, Max Lucado is way up there at the top of my list.
I was told that it's a great lesson for young writers. I was told that John Grisham's first book didn't have a publisher. Nobody bid on it. It shopped it to all of the different publishers. And so he actually self-published it. It may have been the Pelican Brief. I don't remember. But, and then only one bookstore. He lives in Oxford, Mississippi, or did at the time. And the local independent bookstore there, picked that book up, and it took off, and the rest is history, if you would.
Yeah.
Did you have trouble publishing your first book?
No, I I always knew that I wanted to write. In fact, when I was in seminary, I went to seminary at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and I was a guest columnist in the Fort Worth Star Telegram, which made me a favorite of the dean of the School of Psychology and Counseling there, because he would teach and then see something written up in a column in the paper, a couple of weeks later that had something to do with what he had said. And so I love to write, and I went to a marriage seminar in 1982. And after it was over with, I went up to the guy that did it, and I said, really enjoyed the seminar. If you don't have material for your next book, I do. And I would be happy to co-author with you if you want to do that. Well, he didn't have a next book. He liked my material. It really turned out to be, you could say, the first Christian recovery-oriented book that was written. And my first advance for this, because he was a pretty well-known guy, but it involved a video series and other things. My first advance in 1984 was $87,000. So I have to tell you, not every advance has been that much, but I, I just, I just wanted to write, and I took a risk, which is kind of a theme in my life, and it really paid off. I got more, and have continued to do more and better stuff, co-authoring and partnering than I ever could have done on my own.
Now, who was that author or
Well,
the
his
speaker?
his name was Tim Timmons,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Tim at the time was he was one of the finest communicators ever. And I went to his church when I moved to Southern California. That's how I met my writing partner and best friend for 40 years, Dave Stoop,
Hmm.
who just died this past
Yeah.
year. But Tim ended up in trouble, like a lot of successful pastors do. He ended up in affairs, and lost his church and lost
Oh.
his ministry. But I went on to publish um, more books with the people that I met through him.
Steve, did you take any writing courses? Did you go to writing conferences? How did you, at the very beginning, learn the art and craft of writing?
The only writing course I've ever taken were just English classes in college. Um, but I also, after I graduated, I took a screenwriter's class, which I never did anything with it. But that really would be the only writing school or formal training. And there are many frustrated editors that have worked with me over the years that regret probably that that's the only thing I ever did to study writing.
I hear you. In fact, Barb, who's my editor, my wife of 48 years, buys these red pens by the case because, like you, I never had any formal writing training. And it might be, maybe we could just bunny trail on this real quick, because publishers have editors. And I am so grateful to the editors that take my feeble attempts and really help shape them. Do you enjoy the editing process, or is it more difficult for you? Or
I don't enjoy the editing process at all. In fact, I don't edit. In fact, my wife and I, we just finished our 18th Bible project, and she wrote the 1 Year Bible for women, and I wrote the 1 Year Bible for men. And what that um, is it's an additional 100 words of devotional material or insight on each day in the 1 Year Bible. And the editors said to her, "You are very much unlike your husband. He puts it down and sends us the exact amount of words that need to be written and expects us, and we do, expects us to edit and turn it into something amazing. And he said editors actually love his stuff because they get to do something. He said to my wife, "You are a problem for editors because you send us every day is so polished. Even the
Oh.
pentameter has been considered in your prose." And he says they have nothing to do. And so, and then they'll say things about her stuff like, "We don't think anybody has ever thought this or written this
Wow.
about this particular passage." And no one's ever said that to me about anything.
Now,
But
did she have formal training in writing at all, or?
she has a degree in accounting.
Okay.
But but her IQ, her IQ is probably 50 points higher than mine, and that's why we have all these bright to genius level kids. Their IQs are off the charts, as hers is. She's a very smart woman.
Steve, 126 books and counting. How do you come up with your book ideas?
Well, the way you get 126 ideas to be published is to have 126,000 ideas that don't get published. So um, there are a lot of different things. Um, I can tell you what I would suggest to somebody if they wanted to know what to create a book about, because at one point in my life, I used to do this on a regular basis. And so here's that big tip. Um, Go to the local supermarket and buy 10 women's magazines and look at what they've got on the cover. And then some of those themes are going to resonate with you. And then go in and read those articles and see if, as a Christian writer, there might be a different angle, or an angle of truth versus, some tangent that they've gone off of. But what I try to do is find a need that has not been met. Something, because I have a radio show and I'm talking to people all the time. These things rise to the top. What are these issues that people are struggling with, and how could I help them with it? So there are a lot of different ways that I come up with ideas to write about. And then sometimes, just like I went to the first person that I went to, sometimes people call me and say, "How about this?" The book that I'm working on right now is with a New York Times best-selling author, Marcus Brotherton. And Marcus said, "I want to do a book on the thought life of the Christian." And I said, "Every believer's thought life." And a publisher said, "Yes, that's the title." And so we're working on that project now. And, from my perspective, it's kind of the book everybody would want to read, because if you don't have your thought life in order, you're going to be in deeper trouble than you maybe ever thought you could get in trouble.
I'm kind of chuckling because I don't know if it was my first or second book, was 10 Essentials of Highly Healthy People. And Barb, my wife, said, because they wanted to do a picture, like me in a white coat. And she said, no, Walt, you need to have long hair and no shirt, because that's the book covers of what many women buy. I said, well, in this case, no one would buy it. Steve, forming the book after you have the idea, how do you research your books?
Well, I don't research them until I figure out if I have a book or an article. And so this is the formula that I give to every person who asks me, "How do you write a book?" And I'll just start there, and then we'll get to the research piece. So I have an idea, and I will ask the people all around me, "What do you think?" Like my wife and I have an idea about a book about gender. and transgender, and trying to meet that need for parents who are struggling with kids who are, dealing with that issue or asking about it. And so I've got all these psychologists around me that I do radio with and are part of our network. And so I just start asking, what do you think about this idea? And, like in this case, everybody I've talked to thinks it's an amazing idea. So that's where I begin. Do I have a good idea or not? Once I have my idea, I write down the 10 most important things that I want to say about that idea. And that's where the research begins. And I'll take each one of those points and I'll just survey, like a Google search or whatever. I'll just survey that point and see what's out there. What have people said about this? Think about that, process that, and then the goal is I've got 10 major uh, topics, and I want to get 10 major points under each of those 10 topics. Once I've done that, I have a book outline. And so I'll never get writer's block. And some of those 10, when I get into it, they become, rather than 1 point, it becomes 2. So I'll have a book with 10 to 20, probably maximum 20 chapters. But that's how that's how I did Healing as a Choice. It's one of those books I wrote every word of that book, didn't use a co-author. Mm-hmm. But I came up with what are the 10 most healing things a person could do. Yeah. Well, if you look at that question, forgiveness, of course, is going to be right at the top. But then from forgiveness, you have to start with grieving. And so that became, so I looked at, well, why don't people forgive? What's the difficulty in grieving? And that, just having that skeleton. Mm-hmm. And if you have an idea and you've got 3 points, and each of those 3 points has maybe 2 points under it, well, what you might have is an article rather than a book. Mm-hmm. You get that article published, probably more people will read your article than would ever read your book. And so if you'll approach it that way, you won't lose if you love to write.
I've heard some experts say, even on this program, that you should never set out to write a book. You should write shorter articles, web articles, short stories first, so that you get the practice of writing and editing. Would you agree with that or not?
No, because I can write a book, and I've written books, and so I think it's healthy to have the goal of the book in mind, or the book series. Every Man's Battle, we didn't set out to write a book. We set out to do a series of books with ancillary products with it. For someone else, that might be a good starting point, but I really think you should start with the goal of the book being a book, and then your fallback is going to be so much more, it's going to be so much stronger if you do the article or the post that you're going to put online, because you will have had more material than you need, and you'll take the very, very best of that and post that or create the article with it.
Steve, you're a busy boy. You got a lot of things going on with the radio program, the counseling ministries around the country, and a lot of our viewers who are thinking about writing are busy people also. What's your writing schedule? How do you carve out time? How do you stick to it?
Well, like a lot of people, my most productive time is early morning. And so I try to accomplish some kind of writing in the morning. And, one of my favorite authors is Anne Lamott. Mm-hmm. And she's pretty edgy, and but, she says, not in this term. She used a different term. She says, write something crummy every day. And that really is great advice. Don't try to write it perfectly or whatever. Get it on paper, write it. But then when I come down to, after I've been writing a while, when I get to the deadline, that's when I'll take uh, maybe 10 days and do nothing but that writing. Um, this recent project, this 1 year Bible that required 37,200 words to write, it truly was, um, almost every morning writing something to try to, work out two or three 100 word passages
Mhm.
every morning. And then at the end, um, you know, just have nothing else on my plate but writing. And that's how it pretty much goes for every book like that. And sometimes it will be just that 10-day segment. It'll be a project that comes up and we'll do it. We'll do all the writing in 10 days with nothing else on the calendar.
So, Steve, do you have an editing or writing software program that you particularly like?
I write with Microsoft Word, and I don't have any other help. There are some great programs out there that people can use, but to me, you know, um, great writing is usually a partnership with the editing team at the publisher and you. And what that editing team can't come up with are these amazing ideas or concepts or true life stories that you've been through. That's what your job is to focus on. See things from a different angle or see things from the angle. At New Life, we talk about true truth. What is it that God's trying for us to understand through this? Not what is some toxic preacher using this scripture to manipulate us with, So trying to see what's really there or taking a different look or unique approach, that's what that publisher needs from an author. What they don't need is somebody that can write perfectly, grammatically, stuff that nobody cares about or stuff that has been overwritten about. That's not the value of an author to a publisher.
Steve, I want to kind of go back to that 1982 time frame when you were at that marriage conference, hadn't written yet, were thinking about writing. If you could give that 1982 Steve the advice that you've learned since, what advice would you give that young writer?
Well, it's so ironic because the thing that I focused on then is the thing you need to focus on now, but I wish I had focused on something else. So here's what I'm talking about. Back then, I really felt like it was the idea, the concept, um, and the marketing and the public relations that was all important, when in reality, it was the quality of the work and the content that I wish I had focused more on. So that was just for back then. Um, Now you can have the best content and nobody is going to read it except the people that maybe read your blog or something like that, unless you have the platform. And so now a person, before they want to write a book, they really, more than ever, need to think about what's going to sell this thing. Not the publisher. I've got to sell it. So how am I going to sell it? I've got to have an audience. I've got to have a place where people know I am, and they've got to respond to that. So you really have to, in this day and age, do what I wish I had done less of then, and more working on quality. But yeah, quality is important. Uh, they say this: content is king. We hear that all the time. And that's true. Content is king. But connection is the grand emperor of the universe where content is king. If you can't connect to people with your content, then you're probably not going to reach very many people. So, yeah, content king, connection, grand emperor of the universe.
I find that young writers think, well, if I have an agent, I have a publisher, and the publisher's going to sell the book, I don't have to do anything. And as you're saying, really, nothing could be farther from the truth. And so for a young unknown writer, what would be some ways that you would recommend they consider building a platform?
Well, first of all, everybody that is a writer of value most likely has a pretty good network of friends. Now, if you're the Unabomber, there might be a book that people want to read about and you don't have any friends. But what you have is fame already. So that's your platform. But what you have to do is you have to be writing things or doing a broadcast, a podcast, some kind of cast that people will like enough to pass on to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it all begins. You start, you produce, and if people don't reproduce it, they don't send it on to other folks, then maybe what you're writing about or how you're writing it or what you're talking about or how you're talking about, maybe that's not the way you ought to go. You ought to rethink that. Maybe other people have done it better. There's no need for it. It's not striking a chord. So really think about that. And here's another thing. When I was doing Women of Faith, people would go into an arena of 18,000. They'd see these women speaking from the center of the arena on a stage. And I can't tell you how many women came up to me and they would say, I feel like God is calling me to be one of those speakers. Now, I don't think that was true. I don't think God was doing that. I think they saw something they wanted to do, saw something that was miraculous to be part of, and of course they were drawn to it. They had a feeling, and they interpreted that feeling as direction from God. Because when I would ask these people, oh, that's amazing. What do you do now? Who listens to you?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of feedback are you getting? And some might say, I teach a Sunday school class of 5 women and they love it. Some might say, I've never spoken publicly.
Oh, gosh.
So you can see that there's just no chance that that's going to end up over here. So you really need to be realistic and start to see if people are responding to the things that you're doing. And if they are, well, you've got some great potential.
Good advice. Good advice.
Now,
Steve, just a minute or two left. I call this the rapid round. Your favorite word?
My favorite word, super.
Your least favorite word?
Because it leads to superficial, something that we should avoid, and it leads also to superpower, which is what the Holy Spirit provides for us.
Least favorite word?
I can't say it out loud.
Favorite book of the Bible?
John.
Favorite spiritual discipline?
Hospitality is a spiritual gift that leads to the discipline of being selfless or not being selfish and wanting to serve others. But if you come down to the traditional disciplines, my favorite thing is the spiritual discipline of simply study and reading and trying to hear God and not the echoes of other people.
Least favorite spiritual discipline?
I don't know what that would be.
What profession, other than the ones that you've done, would you most like to attempt?
What was that question?
What profession, other than the ones you've done, would you most like to attempt?
I was headed toward Broadway. I would be a Broadway singer. It would, now that I know what this life is all about, it would be very unsatisfying to me, but that would be the ultimate.
Last question. When you enter heaven, Steve, other than well done, thy good and faithful servant, what would you like the Lord to say to you?
Your philosophy was never stop dancing. And because, Steve, you never stopped dancing, you did a lot of things that other people would have given up before they ever worked. That would be a great thing to hear from God.
Steve Arterburn, you've blessed us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Walt.
Well, before we end today's program, if you have a comment or suggestion or an author you'd like me to interview, just email me at insidestory@liftable.tv. That's insidestory@liftable.tv. And in addition, if you'd like to subscribe to one of my blogs or my newsletter, just sign up at drwalt.com. That's drwalt.com. So until our next visit, remember the words of Job, who said, "Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. And may God bless you as you write for Him."
Thanks for watching this episode of The Inside Story, hosted by Walt Larimore. If you have comments about the show or there's an author you'd love to hear from, email Walt at insidestory@liftable.tv.